time for another Pop Music Trends podcast, looking at the latest trends and talk about the music industry. Today, we're focusing on popnomics, the intersection of pop music and economics. Here are your hosts, James and Kelly, also known as Indie Girl.
If you've ever, gone to a local jazz club or maybe spent a night at a small rock venue, maybe attended a community festival, well, you've experienced the independent live music sector. Today, we're digging into its hidden economic lifeblood. We're using data from the 2025 NIVA State of Live report. And what makes this deep dive really interesting, I think, is the source itself. This report tries to quantify the economic footprint of places that are, fiercely independent. We're talking everything from those little small-town honky-tonks right up to university performing arts centers. Because they don't really coordinate, they don't operate like, say, a few big corporations, getting a clear picture of their overall economic health. It's been almost impossible historically.
Exactly. And that's really our mission today. We want to try and reveal just how massive this decentralized network truly is, economically speaking. But, once we establish the sheer scale of its financial contribution, we kind of have to tackle the paradox. Why is this multi-billion-dollar economic engine seemingly always fighting for its survival?
Let's maybe start with the headline figure, because it really forces us to rethink how we view the arts community, doesn't it? Okay, let's unpack this. In 2024, this independent live sector generated $153.1 billion in total economic output across the U.S. I mean, that is just an enormous number, almost invisible, you might say, to the average person.
It really does feel invisible. Most people, I think, they just see the ticket price, right?
Yeah.
But when economists calculate the actual immediate value, what they call the direct effects, that's where we see the foundation. So this sector contributed $86.2 billion directly to the U.S. GDP. It also supported, get this, 908,000 jobs, which translated into $51.7 billion paid out in wages and benefits.
Okay, hold on. Before we move on, I just want to clarify how the researchers got from that $86.2 billion foundation up to the $153.1 billion total. That's a jump of, nearly $67 billion? How reliable is that methodology?
Yeah, actually highly reliable, but yeah, it does need a quick translation. The researchers used standard input-output analysis, specifically the in-plan economic impact models. These are built to track those ripple effects, and they were careful. They intentionally kept the estimates conservative. So the difference between those two numbers, it's the multiplier effect. Sure. The $86.2 billion is the value added. That's the dollar value created directly by the venue itself.
Right.
The $153.1 billion total output figure includes the indirect and induced effects. Think of it like this. A venue hires a security guard. Right? That's a direct effect.
Okay.
That guard then spends their paycheck at, say, a local grocery store. That's an induced effect. And then that grocery store needs to order more supplies from its distributor. That's an indirect effect. That whole chain of spending, that's what pushes the output figure way up to $153.1 billion. It just shows how deeply tangled these venues are in the local economy.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
They aren't just, selling a ticket. They're actually fueling a whole supply chain, and they're certainly paying their share when it comes to public services. Let's talk about the revenue they pump back into government coffers. Okay, so the total tax economic impact generated by these independent stages, it was $19.31 billion. And breaking that huge figure down, it shows us where the money goes. $12 billion to federal taxes, $4.17 billion to state, and $3.14 billion to local taxes.
Yeah, and the report gives us a really fascinating way to sort of contextualize that $19.31 billion. It's roughly equivalent to the entire annual operating budget for NASA.
Wow.
Or, get this, the entire FEMA disaster relief budget.
Wow, okay. So these independent stages, the local clubs, the theaters operating night after night, they're collectively funding critical national services like disaster relief. And they do this by consistently drawing people and their spending into local communities, which I guess brings us to that next layer of impact.
Exactly right. And what's really fascinating here is, unlike a giant stadium that might host 10 big events a year, these independent venues provide persistent year-round economic activity.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, I think. In 2024, this sector served 183.7 million fans and produced over 153,000 events. Crucially, the source notes that 91% of these stages operate year-round. They aren't just selling tickets, they're like consistent anchor tenants for local economies.
The consistency, yeah, that's the engine for those induced effects on tourism we talked about. The fans going to these independent shows generated $10.62 billion in off-site spending. To put that in perspective, that $10.62 billion, it represents 9.2% of the entire U.S. travel and tourism revenue for the year.
Wow.
That's significant influence for a sector that, let's be honest, often feels a bit marginalized.
And what are fans spending that money on outside the venue itself?
It's overwhelmingly lodging, restaurants, and bars. $8.18 billion went directly to hotel stays, other accommodation, for fans traveling to see a show. Another $1.34 billion was spent at local restaurants, pubs, cafes. So these independent venues are essentially helping subsidize the travel and hospitality industries in their towns and cities. If you attend a small festival or maybe drive 2 hours to see a band play in some famous little club, you're contributing directly to that ripple effect.
And while the output numbers are huge, macro-level stuff, the jobs seem intensely micro and local, which makes them really critical for stable community growth, right? The sector directly employs, 316,598 people. But here's the detail that really emphasizes the decentralization. The median venue employs only 20 people.
Exactly. That number, just 20 employees, really demonstrates that this is a sprawling, decentralized job engine. It's not reliant on massive corporate hubs. It's building livelihoods right there where the venues are located.
And these places are just essential for the creative workforce, too. The report highlights their role as talent incubators, noting that, 62% of stages host artist showcases? They're the proving ground, aren't they? Where musicians, comedians, performers, they bridge that gap from maybe practicing in a garage to actually building a sustainable career. They're feeding the entire cultural pipeline.
So, okay, we've established that this independent live sector is, an indispensable economic cornerstone. It supports hundreds of thousands of local jobs, contributes massively to public revenue. And this brings us right back to that core paradox. We have to shift now to the vulnerability. Because despite that massive impact, the report found that 64%, almost two-thirds of independent stages, operated without profitability in 2024.
That is the ultimate head-scratcher, isn't it? I mean, if they're driving $153 billion in output, why are two-thirds of them struggling financially? What are the systemic pressures that are just eroding those already, razor-thin margins?
Well, it really comes down to a couple of things. Cost disease and systemic exploitation. The top operational challenges they reported were, first, difficulty with marketing and audience acquisition, then skyrocketing artist costs, staffing costs too, general inflation obviously, and critically, monopolies and scalpers, particularly in ticketing. And the outlook for 2025, it looks pretty grim based on expectations. 60% of venues expect artist fees and booking fees to increase even further.
Wow.
58% expect staffing costs to rise again. And 55% are bracing for higher insurance costs. Because these businesses operate on such low margins, they just can't simply absorb these kinds of increases year after year.
Let's look at the expense structure for a second, just to see why rising costs are so devastating. If you follow the money right, 31% of all their expenses went to artist and booking fees, and another 26% went to staffing.
Yeah.
That means a venue spends well over half of every single dollar they take in directly on people, the artists and the production staff.
That's right.
They're operating on incredible efficiency, or maybe just frankly goodwill sometimes. And the revenue side makes it really clear just how sensitive they are to any change. 46% of their total revenue comes from ticket sales, and 25% comes from alcohol and beverages. So that's 71% of their entire operating budget, depending on just those two core revenue streams.
And both of those pillars are under pretty heavy attack right now. Ticketing, as we mentioned, is severely threatened by external market pressures. Because most small venues rely on third-party platforms, they get hit hard by things like forced ticket transferability, unchecked secondary resale markets, and platforms that institute, unfair practices. For a small venue with maybe 20 employees fighting these massive, often monopolistic ticketing entities, it's an existential battle. When they lose control over their own ticket inventory, they lose critical income, and they lose the trust of their fans, too. And the secondary threat to revenue, alcohol, and beverage sales, that's also complex. Shifting consumption trends across the country mean they can't rely on those high-margin bar sales perhaps as much as they used to, which makes their reliance on transparent ticket income even more critical.
So it sounds like they're caught in a classic economic squeeze. High fixed costs, mostly related to people, escalating artist costs, combined with a revenue stream that's constantly being diverted or chipped away at by external forces and market consolidation.
Precisely. And this is compounded by that policy gap we touched on earlier. These independent stages are the decentralized job creators, the tax generators. Yet they often operate without the policy protections or the economic incentives or regulatory support that's provided to other sectors. Often larger, more centralized sectors with maybe similar or even lesser economic impact. There's just this fundamental disconnect between their value and their protection under policy.
But despite all these, frankly, crippling threats, the report does note a real sense of resilience, even optimism among operators. For example, nearly half, 49% of the stages that reported difficulties in 2024, they still expect their 2025 profitability to improve. That really speaks volumes, doesn't it, about the dedication in this industry?
It really does. And we have to recognize that their contribution often goes far beyond just the economic metrics. While sure, 61% focus primarily on music, these venues serve such a vital role as community hubs. They host a huge variety of non-monetary programs, things like supporting local social causes, food drives, even essential safety programming like CPR and first aid training. They really are local leaders, often using their physical spaces to help solve community problems, not just sell entertainment.
So what does all this mean for you, the listener? Well, it means that when you choose to buy a ticket or attend a show or even just purchase a drink at an independent stage, you are actively supporting a decentralized job engine. You're fueling local tourism, and you're providing a launchpad for the creative workforce. The necessity of this sector for our communities and just for the continued health of the arts, it really can't be overstated.
Yeah, if we connect this all back to the bigger picture, the data presents a really clear, powerful conclusion. The independent live sector is not some luxury item. It is a critical economic cornerstone that is currently threatened by systemic market consolidation and relentlessly rising costs.
And that leads us to a final provocative thought for you to consider, maybe going back to that tax revenue figure.
Right. If that $19.31 billion in annual tax revenue is comparable to the entire FEMA disaster relief budget, then the health of the independent live sector seems directly related to our nation's capacity to respond to national emergencies. So if this sector were to collapse or maybe consolidate entirely into just a few monopolized ecosystems, that highly stable, decentralized source of public revenue would vanish. Does public policy currently recognize the independent live sector as the essential, maybe even non-expendable economic role player that this data strongly suggests it is?
That's a powerful question to leave you with. The next time you attend a show in a small, independent venue, just remember the two sides of that coin. It is simultaneously an economic giant and a financial underdog fighting for its survival and for your community night after night. Thank you for joining us.